Besides, he is quite concerned, as you see on his face. And third one is Waqf. Another important aspect in the reorientation of health service is the financing constraints facing governments. The Islamic system of Waqf endowments was an important means of ensuring and granting revenues for all vital social and health services in Muslim communities. The great Islamic libraries of the 10th and 11th centuries, the foundation of mosques, hospitals, healthcare institutions, and the 18th century all ensured their functions actively through waqfs, as well as zakat funds. Zakat is a compulsory, it's compulsory for every Muslim, and every adult Muslim is obliged to donate 1/4 of his or her personal wealth each year to someone in need or to an institution. Therefore, if you have $40,000, for example, it should be $1,000 each year to someone. Or therefore, it's quite a good solution for the difference between poor and wealthy. The protection of nature, people should live in an environment that is clean, beautiful, and peaceful. And Quran says, God loves those who keep themselves pure and clean. And Prophet Muhammad said, God is beautiful and loves beauty. And purity, cleanness, is half of the faith, which is not quite widespread in many Muslim countries, unfortunately now. When we come to Ottoman Empire and applications, Ottoman Empire had a long history of tending to the health of its population through subsidized health institutions. Sultans endowed religious charitability foundations that sponsored medical and social service complexes. Records show that the most significant portion of hospitals' expenses went simply to provision of food for patients. There is also evidence that the state attempted to regulate public nuisance, such as slaughterhouses, that could pose a threat to sanitation and health. The provincial municipal law, which restricted local government throughout the Ottoman Empire, entrusted municipalities with significant public duties, which are the following: removal of refuse, establishment of suitable public markets, and etc. Although municipal government and not the central government was the primary enforcer of public health standards under this system, the presence of a national law setting the standards for public health and hygiene is significant. With the provision of municipal law, the central government trusts itself into the field of public health, even if it would rely on municipalities to work out the details and to exercise primary enforcement power. As a conclusion, it's possible to argue that Islamic principles and institutions are ideal to provide a well-organized and ethical public health service. This was demonstrated in different Muslim communities since 10th century, and Ottoman Empire was a good example among these states. With that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, I think it's a very good historical view. Public health is something which, although you said started in the 19th century, it's actually, at one point, you're actually talking about evolution over a millennium. And we have the next session after the tea break on the Eastern Mediterranean region, which will explore this in more detail. There's time for a couple of questions now.
To take care of exactly some of the things that you're talking about. So just wanted to put that on record.
That's why ignore and neglect many prophetic principles. That's why we are known as woman eaters and women rights. Women rights doesn't respect women's rights. In fact, it is not fact in original principles.
Any other comments or questions? Richard, please.
Yeah, I'll just back here. What?
Use a mic, please, for the recording. We need to send a report to a government.
Thank you very much. That's really quite interesting. What were the corrective mechanisms if this system was not followed? In other words, Was there a way of, if things were not being done, we all have these wonderful ideals, but what if it wasn't being done?
The judges and the governors, they're the people who is responsible will be taken from this job and will be replaced with someone else, or maybe the qadis and the judges will correct it, and the governor. I don't know if you have anything to add, Professor Moazam.
Actually, what I've read, the punishments sorry. I'm not a historian, but what I've read about it is that some of the punishments, obviously it went through the qadi, but would include things like whipping and fines, depending on the nature of the misdemeanor. So they were, Richard, they were pretty tough punishments.
Please try to start at least by 4. Be back in room 5 to 4, so we'll try and start a little bit ahead of time. If we start at 5 to 4. And I think all the speakers are here, yes, and you should have your PowerPoints up here. I'd also like to remind everyone, tonight we have a farewell dinner. It's at 6 p.m. in the secretariat room on level 2. But we have I think, looking forward to the panel after tea and a long discussion period.
Afternoon panel discussion. This is the panel on ethics and research in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And before we begin the panel, this panel is supported by the Eastern Mediterranean Regional Organization, EMRO, of the WHO, and very grateful for them for the support. This was organized by the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture, Pakistan, with support and help from the MIRITI, the Middle East Research Ethics Training Initiative, and we see their fellows, and the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture, both participating in this panel and representing the part of the EMRO region. The EMRO region, of course, spans from Pakistan on the eastern side to Morocco on the west. So it's 22 countries in all, large number of, a huge population, a very diverse group of people. So we have 2 panels. One is today, the other one on education is tomorrow. So for the first paper, I would like to invite Dr. Farhat Moazam. She will be talking about exploring ethics and akhlaq, the eye of the beholder. Dr. Moazam. She heads the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture in Pakistan. Yeah, we'll have to exchange seats. Is this yours?
Assalamu alaikum. Because of the time limitations, and also because we have a very tough boss over here, I'm going to try and see if I can keep my talk in the specified time. So I bring you greetings from Pakistan and from the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture, which is an SIUT. We call it Exploring Ethics and Akhlaq. Akhlaq is an Urdu word, which is a translation of ethics. And the eye of the beholder here is patients and public, actually the attendants. This is just to show you, this is a view of the center, and in this we're just about 2.5 years old, and we focus on education in bioethics and capacity building, and some research in which we look at cultural issues. What I'm going to do is cover 4 things for you, and I apologize, I will be doing it fairly rapidly. The first point here, as you can see, essentially is to lay the stage for you as to the study that I'm then going to present. And the stage essentially is ideas versus reality. I will then move on to the study itself, and this is a survey we've done on Pakistani patients and attendants and what they think of the ethical and the good doctor. And the two words, please remember, ethical or ethics would be akhlaq, and a good doctor is acha. So we will focus on these two areas. The third bullet, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of our findings. We don't have time to go over it all. And the last is, I will end with a parable from Jalaluddin Rumi. I'll begin with Jalaluddin Rumi. He was a Muslim Sufi, and he is very well known to Muslims all over the world. And he says, having the idea is not living the reality of anything. So, what is the background? Why did we do the study that I'm going to tell you about? And here, this is a bit of my own personal journey. I'm a physician who got interested in bioethics and did some more with it, went back and studied some more. Now, when we look at contemporary bioethics, that's essentially a relatively 40-year-old, maybe 50-year-old discipline. It started in the United States. That's a country where I did a lot of my education and training. And it started essentially, the stakeholders there, those who initiated it, were philosophers, theologians, lawyers, and a great deal of input from the public. Out of this came contemporary bioethics. Physicians came very late to bioethics. Now, in the globalization of contemporary bioethics, at least in Pakistan, the globalization, in fact, is being done by the medical profession, which I find very interesting because it really started, the movement for bioethics, contemporary bioethics, started as a reaction against physicians. But we're the ones who are really globalizing it. And when I say the we here, I really mean Pakistani, Western-trained physicians. Now, having studied bioethics in the state, and when I came back to Pakistan and started to apply it, several things became very evident to me very quickly as a physician. Among the many things, one of the things was the issue of language. Now, Pakistan the national language is Urdu, and it's a combination of Arabic and Persian. And ethics is translated into akhlaq. Now, contemporary bioethics is 50 years old, but when it's biomedical ethics, which is translated into tibbi akhlaqiyat, goes back for centuries, and a lot has been written about it in Muslim civilization. Another problem that I came across is the word paternal, from which comes paternalistic, which is pejorative, and has been used in that fashion this morning, for example, in a lot of talks. The Urdu word for that is pidri. Pidri is actually a very positive term. It's a term which means the father, the benevolence of somebody in the position of a father. Autonomy, we've been hearing a great deal about autonomy. The word that we use in Urdu for that is khud mukhtari. Now, this is a translation, but autonomy is a social construct. It's a concept. It's not just a word. And when you look at the concept of autonomy, which is total self-governance, in Pakistan and in Islam, khud mukhtari would only be something that God would have, because humans are considered to have very limited autonomy. They do have governance, but it's within strict borders. The issue of family, we translate that into khandan. Now, khandan is not the nuclear family. So in Pakistan, when you talk of the khandan, it goes beyond the mother, father, and children to cousins, and cousins are your brothers and sisters. You call them bhai and behen. You do not call them first cousins, second cousins. So the issue of language in my own clinical practice became very evident. So the study that we wanted to do was really, here was the premise, the first point I have over here. if we do bioethics in medicine, we do it really for patients and the public. They are the beneficiaries, or they should be the beneficiaries. What we are doing in Pakistan, in my opinion, is that we are transplanting bioethics into Pakistan the same way as we transplanted science into Pakistan. We have had no input from the stakeholders in Pakistan, and those are patients and our public. And we're schizophrenic about bioethics in Pakistan. We do all our lectures in English, and English is spoken by a bare minimum number of Pakistanis. And then when we start discussing it, we slip into Urdu. So a bit of a schizophrenic area. Okay, let me move on to the next one. So Lawrence Darryl, those of you who've read his quartets, and we took them from two places. One was a public hospital, the other was a private hospital. Approvals were obtained from the ethics review committees, and we took verbal consent from subjects. The interesting thing is, no study. The study, the beholder here, as I said, is the patients and the attendants. And this was done. Questions were, what in your opinion are the characteristics of an acha doctor, which is a good doctor? Any differences between the two? This was the public hospital we used. You can see that it's just and a more exclusive group of patients. Clifford Geert says that man is an animal suspended in webs of significance. He is the public sector, a hospital on the right is LNH, which is the private sector. And essentially, SIUT, we looked at post-transplant patients, and in LNH, we looked at patient attendance. As fast as I'm going, I'm not sure how far I can go, but let me give it a try. Okay, so we asked, now remember, how do you recognize a Ba'akhlaq doctor, which in English would be an ethical doctor? And what I have here is what is written. They're talking about the Ba'akhlaq doctor is somebody who has compassion, who cares for people, who has a loving nature, who is patient, who is fair in his dealings with all kinds of people, who pays attention to what the physician, what the patient says. So our patients were and our attendants are talking of virtue ethics. There was no mention by any of them of things like, for example, rights or autonomy or khud mukhtari. And the second bullet on this, a vast majority of them essentially said this in so many words, and I'll translate it for you, that the Ba'akhlaq, if you go to a Ba'akhlaq doctor, and I've just defined what that is, half your muds, half your disease disappears, okay? They said again in Urdu was, you can only be a acha doctor if you are with akhlaq. So they did not differentiate between the two. Okay, and this is an extremely important slide. Aamir, I know I'm going over time, but this particular one is important, goes back to the Pidri and the paternalistic. The family paradigm came through again and would to his child. He gives the love that the ma and the ba, which is parents, give. He treats us as though I am a brother or a sister. So the paternalist, the family paradigm comes in, which again, as I said, is very different in our culture. Okay, well, those of you who've read Alice in Wonderland, I love this thing. I would prefer to go back to Rumi, and Rumi says that how do you tell an elephant in a dark room? And if the elephant is essentially morality, amorality, then he says each of us goes in, touches one place, and understands the whole in that way. So I think it's important what it feels like. Thank you. And I apologize for going.
I think we can have one more.
Dr. Farhat, Moazam, your study reveals that the Pakistan, the citizens and the patients of Pakistan, they live in both the moral character of the doctors, and moral character and the paternalistic attitude of the doctors and lays the proficiency in medicine. While the Western bioethics nowadays disregards the paternalistic attitude of the physician. How will you explain this Western-Eastern conflict?
Something that's a computer chip that you can put in. We grow up with it. You know, our culture, our religion, our beliefs feed us these different ways. So the way we look at the family and what is important to some of the Asian societies is perhaps different. There's a lot of overlap also, but different from that in the West. The point I was making is we're products of this, but contemporary bioethics, I've seen it from both sides, and I think it is dominated by the autonomy paradox, which is the autonomy centrality. And all I'm saying is that it is time, and ABA is the perfect place to do this, is to bring in the other viewpoints to it, because I think we enrich our understanding. We live messy lives. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Dr. Moazam. I think we'll move on to the next paper. The co-chair, Sahin, true to his name, has flown. Sahin in Turkish means falcon, and he's flown. So I think I'll have to do the chair. Thank you, Dr. Moazam. The next paper is by Dr. Henry Silverman. He'll be talking about the adequacy of ethics.
Hello, glad to be here. Salam alaikum, and I believe Sawandi Yindi Don Wap. Is that right? I'd like to, Alaa AbouZeid was supposed to be presenting his research, but could not make it here today, so I'm standing in for him. The title of this research study was The Adequacy of Ethical Review and Informed Consent Documents in Investigation Submitted for Funding to the EMRO region. Background for the study: research in developing countries has grown enormously during the last decade. Commentators, however, have expressed concern that many of these countries lack effective ethics review systems and that the concept of informed consent is imperfectly realized. The current literature only describes in qualitative terms the status of ethics review of research and the regard for informed consent in the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean region. A thorough situation analysis of the status of health research ethics in the EMRO region would help policymakers enhance efforts to increase research ethics capacity. The objectives of our study is shown in this slide, essentially to determine the extent to which ethics review is obtained for health research, to determine the extent to which there is an intent to obtain informed consent for health research, and to determine the adequacy of informed consent forms used in health research. The next few slides shows the methods of this study. In this slide, we see that the setting consisted of applicants from the 12 countries in the EMRO region who submitted proposals in 2006 to the EMRO WHO grant schemes in priority areas of public health and the EMRO ComStec grant schemes in applied biotechnology and genomics. Data measurements, essentially the grant proposal had a one-page ethical consideration form in which they asked investigators whether they obtained ethics review for their proposals and whether they had the intention to obtain informed consent in proposals involving human subjects. The grant also asked for the submission of the informed consent form, and we analyzed the elements of the informed consent forms in the submitted forms. We developed a checklist tool listing the basic elements of informed consent obtained from current research ethics guidelines. A scale of 1 to 5 was used to rate each element, a score of 1 indicating the presence of the element with complete and understandable information, a score of 2 to 4 indicated the presence of the element but with inadequate information, and a score of 5 indicated complete absence of that element of informed consent. 2 authors made an independent assessment of the elements of informed consent, and the third author, myself, compared the assessments and subsequently merged the 2 assessments to produce a final rating. The next few slides shows the results of this analysis. This table shows the submitted grants. Essentially, there was 144 grants submitted, of which 72% involved human subjects, and the human subject research grants consisted of multiple types: non-drug intervention studies, collection of biological tissues, interview, questionnaires, and also the collection of archive data. This slide shows the rate of ethical clearance and the intent to obtain informed consent for the human subject research proposals. Essentially, about 42% of the proposals obtained ethical review from their ethics committee upon submission. About 60% of the proposals had an intent to obtain informed consent, and about 40% of the proposals submitted an informed consent document to be used in the research. This slide shows country data, and as you can see, we anonymized the results to be confidential regarding each individual country. There were 12 countries, and the range of the intent to obtain informed consent was between 37% and 84%. And regarding confidentiality, the form also asked whether there was going to be an intent to ensure confidentiality of the data, and that ranged between 74 to 100%. This slide shows the availability and the adequacy of the information in informed consent form documents. Just to highlight a few of the results shown on this table, we see that several elements were lacking. In particular, about 93, a lot of the forms lacked essential information about contact information, especially about who to contact regarding questions about rights or complaints, and who to contact regarding research injury. None of the forms had any mention about the availability of medical care for research injury. More than half of the forms did not describe the risks of the interventions, and in 22% of the forms, any description of the risk was deemed to be inadequate. And then finally, 40% of the forms did not have any mention about the voluntariness of participation. This slide shows the number of forms with missing elements. Essentially, 10 forms had 0 to 5 missing elements, 20 forms had 6 to 10 missing elements, and about 15 forms had greater than 11 missing elements. Discussion. Many investigators did not obtain ethical approval for their research proposals prior to submission. Many investigators did not intend to obtain informed consent. Of those investigators who realized the value of informed consent, only 2/3 submitted a written document, and a large number of basic elements of informed consent forms were absent or inadequately described in many informed consent forms. Now, having presented these data, the question in my mind, and what I'd like to propose to this audience, is essentially, is the glass half full or is it half empty? What I mean to say is that, what is the benchmark? Research ethics is an emerging concept in many countries. And if we look at the Western countries, see that the results were either half empty or half full. Especially If we take the results from the U.S., increased efforts are needed to enhance the knowledge regarding information needed for a valid informed consent form, and educational training programs should further be developed to enhance research ethics capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. I just need to ask somebody, your findings were it's up 40% of the proposals did not go through an ethics review board or an IRB. Is the reason, what were the reasons behind this? That's the first question. And the second one, about 30% not intending to ask for informed consent. Have you probed some of the reasons or the main reasons for this?
Investigators we did analyze those responses. Some of them said we're only analyzing samples obtained from patients who came in for routine medical care. Some of them did not have ethics committees. Some of them obtained approval from the director of the hospital. Those were some of the substitute reasons. We did not, the form did not elicit reasons for not obtaining informed consent. But that's a good question.
Yeah, it was very interesting presentation. Informed consent and confidentiality figures were up. So do you find any sort of correlation between those two?
Well, I think do you mean from the country data?
Yes.
Oh, right. Well, it's hard to make any correlation from the countries that had less than 5 studies. I think I mean what to make of 1 out of 1 for confidentiality or 1 out of 3. It's hard to make.
Quite from the ethics committee, but you did not mention anything about the non-human, I mean the animal subjects. What is the stance of the humans, stance of the team about the animal subjects?
Good question. Actually, we have data for the animal subjects, and 50% of the proposals involving animals.
Thank you, Dr. Silverman, for an interesting talk and discussion. Let's move on to the next topic, which will be by Dr. Rana Muzafar from the Center of Biomedical Ethics, from actually Sindh Institute of Urology and Transplantation, Pakistan. Her talk is on common issues in ethical review of research, Pakistani perspective. Dr. Rana.
Thank you, Dr. Aamir. And before I start with my presentation, I want to acknowledge the help of Dr. Aamir Jafarey in putting this presentation together. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the issues that ethics review committees in Pakistan face in reviewing research proposals. And I'll briefly talk about the present research scenario in Pakistan and the related issues related to training deficiencies, informed consent, conflict of interest, and the review process itself. At present, there are 32 randomized control trials that are registered and are recruiting patients. 10 of these trials are being conducted by one pharmaceutical company, and 10 are being conducted by a single private university. 8 trials are being conducted by US NIH institutes or centers. So what is the capacity for ensuring that research in Pakistan is conducted only after appropriate ethics review of the proposal is obtained? We have a National Bioethics Committee constituted by the Pakistan Medical Research Council. This council is a federal authority and is responsible for medical research in Pakistan. The council is in the process of formulating national guidelines, bioethics guidelines, but is not actively involved in the process of ethical review at this time. There are 12 IRBs that are recognized by the International by the Office of Human Resource Protections, USA, and these IRBs are able to review projects that are funded by US agencies or US research institutions. What are the institutional mechanisms within Pakistan for ethical review? Study done by Dr. Aamir Jafarey in Pakistan identified 24 institutions out of 68 that had ERCs or IRBs in place. So there's limited institutional mechanisms for review present at this time. And this slide simply lists the 12 IRBs that are recognized at this time. And I just want to point out that there are several of these IRBs represent NGOs like New Zealand Hair or RI Research Cell. There are a few of them that represent medical institutions or research institutes and other organizations, other basic research organizations in the country. So what are the issues that are important in this context? The first major issue that we face in reviewing research projects in the country is the training deficiency that exists at this time. And the reason for this is that we are not teaching ethics at the undergraduate or postgraduate level. There may be some institutions who might be teaching, but in general, ethics is not being taught in Pakistan. With the result that there are not enough people available who are knowledgeable in ethics and can participate in the review process. And there's another problem. There are lack of opportunities also. There's the problem of lack of opportunities for people who are trained in ethics. And if somebody is able to manage ethics training, then there are no very limited opportunity. The problem that we are facing is that there is overtraining versus non-exposure to ethics in the country. And what this means is that in the last few years that there have been ethics training workshops and seminars conducted. Most of these have been conducted in Karachi. And there's a limited number of people in Karachi who are interested in the ethics process, and the same people attend these workshops, so they're getting, one way you can say that they're getting overtrained. But this training is not expanding, and the capacity building that is intended is not taking place. Another important issue that the ethics review committees are facing relates to the informed consent process, and I'll briefly talk about the consent forms or the written forms that are being used, especially in the clinical trials that are being conducted. I mean, we are all familiar with lengthy and complex forms used by pharmaceutical companies or drug companies. But what really compounds this problem is that when the consent forms are translated into the local languages, for instance in Pakistan into Urdu, the translations are extremely difficult to read. And a project that was recently reviewed at our institution, we found that the translations were so literal and so difficult that even the reviewers had a hard time reading these forms. And when you just go through the whole form, you realize that it's more of a disclaimer or a legalistic document rather than an informative document, and that the concepts that are supposed to be translated and provided to the participants, that message never gets through. Then there's another problem that there's a lot of irrelevant information from the perspective of participants in Pakistan. These forms are designed or written by people in the developed countries, and there are a lot of support services in the form of insurance, importance for the participants in Pakistan. And another issue that we identified while reviewing a recent project is that there is ambiguity about care availability during the period that research is conducted. Now, this because clinical trial is going on, And this care may be available and is available in big cities like Karachi and other cities in Pakistan, but they are really absent or not available in the rural areas or the less developed parts of the country. So another issue is that should people who live in the rural areas where the support services are available, should they be enrolled in these studies or should they participate in these studies? And what should be the role of IRBs be while reviewing the project? And another issue related to informed consent is that there's really lack of real choice for participants. I mean, the intent of informed consent is that it would be a voluntary consent to participate in the study. But if we look at the realities, proposals, the issue is, should IRBs take these factors into considerations, or should there be a role of IRBs in this process? Here is probably not isolated and not restricted to Pakistan, but we feel that translations just exaggerate the problem. We recently found out that placebo was translated as an ineffective drug. So this can create a lot of confusion in the minds of the participants. And there are the issues of conflict of interest arising due to incentives or compensation for principal investigator and for the subjects principal investigator reward for recruitment of subjects for research officers. Sometimes the compensation is so, it may be not comparable to the time that the principal investigators put in. So if a principal investigator gets overly compensated, is that ethical or not? If the research officers get reward for recruiting subject, is that ethical? Should IRBs look at the amount of compensation? I'm going to stop here, and thank you for your patience.
So we can have a question from Hany.
Thank you. I have a question about the turnover of members of ethics review committees in Pakistan, and who appoints the members of ethics review committees. You also mentioned overtraining, that they come to centres and you have lots of courses. So have you tried to train trainers to conduct an ethics trainers? And I know about the diploma program, but are there other, is this critical to this training, or are there other programs in Pakistan to train trainers?
There, the Center of Bioethics, CBAC, is started a training program, but there are no other centers in the country that are providing ethics training. And the issue at times, the head of the institutions have a lot of say over who sits on these committees, and this rises the conflict of interest issue, adds to the problems.
Can I just, if I can just add something to that? The Medical Research Council, and they have training workshops. And CBAC actually has also helped them. So they do a little bit of that, but as Dr. Rana says, I don't think there's sufficient attention to training trainers.
Interesting was the commonalities between that and the situation in Australia, which might sound a bit anomalous. We've got over 200 ethics committees in every institution, every piece of research with humans has to go before an ethics committee now. But questions like consent forms, the legalistic rather than the informative nature of them, and conflicting interests. We've just got exactly the same issues in Australia. And if I could just make a comment on the conflicting interests, the new research guidelines for research with humans will be coming out later this year in Australia, and from the public consultation documents we're moving towards a position where it will be up to the researchers to disclose all those kinds of interests that you mentioned, and then it will be up to the ethics committee, and then it will be up to the ethics committee how much of that they require to be on the information form for the patients. But certainly the issues are just striking how common they are.
Question is computing question from the informed consent. The informed consent, it is the expression of the autonomy of the patient or the research subject. what I mean, the type of the autonomy is, do we desire from the patient? Is it an utter, total, and utter and total self-governance, or something else? If we do desire that is total, utter self-governance, is it really achievable in Pakistani or Indian community? Particularly for the females and oppressed population.
Well, I think that's an issue that concerns us. But my response to this would be that the ethics committees, when reviewing the projects, have to really, sharing of decision making in Pakistani society. But the participants have to be aware of the process, and we would like the consent to be as voluntary as possible.
I think time has saved you. Okay, we have to move on to the next talk. Thank you, Dr. Rana. I'd like to invite Dr. Hany from the National Hepatology and Tropical Medicine Research Institute, Cairo. Hany will be talking about the evaluation of ethical review procedures for research in Egypt.
First, I want to express my pleasure and sincere honor to be here in Thailand and talk in the HL Bioethics Conference. I will talk about evaluation of ethics review procedure for research in Egypt. In Egypt, there is a rich history of medical ethics. 2,700 years before Christ and before the oath of Hippocrates, Papyrus showed the first medical ethics guideline ever written. It said, have an expectant attitude and trust in nature healing, be observant of the patient condition. In the 12th century, Musa bin Maymun, in his daily prayer of physician, stated, don't let a desire for profit, fame, or admiration interfere with your work. Help the rich and the poor, enemy and friend equally. Care for lives and health of all creatures. But research ethics is an emergent concept in Egypt, and the role of research ethics, and more specifically research ethical committees, is developing. Several research ethical committees exist, but many lack essential resources for effective functioning. We have many problems facing Egyptian research ethical committees. This include lack of national ethical guidelines, few research ethical committee members with adequate training in research ethics, insufficient resources, equipment, space, and personnel. This leads to loss of members' motivations. Also, a culture challenges like consent form is unpopular even in the medical practice. Absence of network to ensure communication between different research ethical committees, and lack of regulation, no punishment for unethical researcher. We don't have a legal mandates, even in the Egyptian constitution. Article 43 said any medical or scientific experiment may not be performed on any person without his free consent. Also, Egyptian constitution states the need for informed consent in research. What is missing is the power of specific legalization. There are little data from Egyptian Research Ethical Committee regarding their structure, function, and resources needs. In the next few slides, I will discuss a study we will be preparing to do. Our aim with this study is to understand better the role of Research Ethical Committee in Egypt, identify, perceive resources, and the capacity building needs of Egyptian Research Ethical Committee for the review of research protocols. We developed a survey tool that will collect data on the following domains: demographic information, membership composition, training needs, perceived challenges for effective functioning, workload, Also, the use of research ethical guidelines, use of standard operating procedures, process of research ethical review, and necessary financial and material resources. We'll incorporate open-ended question in this survey tool for identification and selection of research ethical committees. We'll obtain the contact detail of research ethical committee in Egypt from previously held workshop in Egypt and internet search, and from the website of United States Office of Human Research Protection. I think this site is the only site many Egyptian research ethical committee registered at, about 15, I think now. We will select a research ethical committee that have been active for at least 1 year, and survey will be distributed to the research ethical committee chairpersons. About confidentiality, survey will be completed without the use of the name of individual research ethical committee members, and identifiable details of each research ethical committee will initially be coded but paid anonymously after all information collected. Assurance of confidentiality enhances accuracy of reporting without a fear of being seen as lacking capacity to review research proposal. We will evaluate the quantitative data set using AbouZeid descriptive statistics, and response to open-ended questions will be coded for basic themes and analyzed using AbouZeid techniques for qualitative data analysis. We hope in the end our result will lead to help institutional officials and policymakers to better understand the resources, capacity needs for a strong human subject protection program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yes, please.
Back to 3,000-4,000 BCE and look at some of the old written stuff like you've mentioned in ancient Egypt, ancient Sumeria, Persia, India. There was just so much knowledge. Humanity knew so much about ethics, about medicine, about philosophy. What do you think happened that in the intervening period we lost so much of what we already knew and we have to rediscover in modern history?
I think materialism, something like this.
Included in the survey as well.
I think materialism is the most important item now, and it leads to change of doctor from philosopher to looking for a money or something. It's from crazy.
Research initially, because it's now shifted to, this is how others have also, and in my opinion too, research initially used to be a patient. It was not research the way we do it now, which is for the common good. And I think research now brings us so many other advantages which were not there. You can work with NIH, you get a lot of money, you can publish papers, you move up academically in the rank. So I think research in itself has changed. As far as the other things, as the doctor here says, the issue of materialism, maybe some of that has come in. And the reason we're saying this maybe is because I have gray hair. And the older generation still thinks about that, but that's just my personal opinion.
Dr. Hany, it would have been nice to see some results of this survey.
Invite him back next year. He'll have the results.
I'm not sure whether that will be possible, but when do you expect to have results, and how do you expect to disseminate them so that we can know what's going on?
I think we will distribute the survey after return to Egypt, and within 6 months or 1 year maximum, we'll have the result maybe published or be presented at another conference, maybe it's the next stage.
Thank you very much. You have a question? Okay, thank you.
sure it's possible to come back to Indonesia. Probably
yes.
We're looking forward to it now with our advertising. As a question, you mentioned that the main site for registration of the ethics committees is NIH. So how many percent of the externally sponsored research in Egypt is from Europe and how much from NIH? And how many percent of externally sponsored research is from the US, is from Europe, or from elsewhere?
So for me, I don't have any data about this question. I don't know about
everything. That may be, so maybe interesting for your survey to include some aspects of the external sponsorship of research as well.
Most of the research done in Egypt, about 90% in the form of MD or master thesis in medical schools. And most of this research ended in the library on the shelf. Without Egypt last year, 3,400. It's very minimal for the name of Egypt as a power of brain power of the Arabic world. It's very short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hany. We now move on to the next talk, which is on the survey of attitudes of Egyptian population living in remote areas towards research, participation, and storage of human biological specimens. This is a very interesting topic by Magidi Shahada. He's from the Ain Shams University, Cairo. Look forward to
speakers in Bioethics conference. I will give a presentation on the survey on the attitudes of an Egyptian population living in a remote area towards the research participation and storage on biological samples. The continuous and tremendous progress during the last 30-40 years in science and technology, especially in the genetic engineering, has led to the increasing importance of using biological stored and or newly collected tissue samples for genetic and non-genetic researchers. And also ethical issues have been raised to involve these samples in research. The participation preference for participation, participants' preference for participation, consent issues, and collaborations and ownership of the samples. Now, why the potential opinions of human subjects are important to conduct biomedical research? For two reasons. The first is to enhance the process, their willingness to provide biological sample for future research, preference for consent for donating biological samples, and also for the types and of conditions placed on collected samples. As for the coming few slides, we're going to talk about the study design. We selected an area in Rafah city, which is north and eastern Sinai, 35 kilometers off Rafah. It is called the Barth area. It is nearby the Bedouins, and they also have some inhabitants from local and sporadic workers from other governments. The reason for this selection was because this area represents a focus of transmission of cutaneous leishmaniasis, which we are interested in our Ain Shams University in Egypt. As for the respondents, we plan to have a sample size of 250 residents with an inclusion criteria of age grouping from 18 to 70 years old, both males and females. As you can see from these pictures, this is the type of houses they have. They are all built from the dry trees, although you can see from this is a tank where they can collect water during the winter time to be used in the area. It's a really primitive area. And this is our team, the collectors. For the survey development, we developed a survey questionnaire which was designed to cover the following domains: the attitudes, the attitudes toward participation in medical research, attitudes towards the consent for unspecified future research on biological understandable Arabic format to be distributed and to be easy for the collectors to work with. Retesting of survey with subsequent revisions have been also done. The samples were collected randomly from the selected area where the village was actually divided into 3 sectors, or we can name it localities. The collectors are myself and the assistants well trained, and also we had to include 2 nurses from the local health unit in order to facilitate the recruitment of women from that area. The coming few slides will show you. I'll show you the results that we have had. 229 of the 26 participants completed the survey, both from males and females. The ratio here is 3 to 1. This ratio does not actually represent the real ratio of men and women in the area, but it's only represent what we have collected, because it's forbidden and it's very difficult for the woman to see strangers. So we relied on the 2 nurses there. The education was 35%, literacy, with the employment 23% unemployed participants. This slide shows you the attitudes of the participants toward the types of biomedical research, what are the most important selected type, whether it's sample collection, drug trials, or questionnaire. 70% of the participants have positively responded to the sample collection. However, 15% and for drug trials, and the same percentage for questionnaire. The reason for selecting the sample collection, they thought that information to obtain more information on diseases and to help others. And this slide shows their attitude to be volunteer for research. 63% of the participants responded positively to help the other patients. 30%